You know, we've had all this genetic talks and cow focus, but now we're gonna move on to some calf, which is always a lot of fun. So what I'm gonna be talking to you guys today is about cooling calves with mechanically ventilated hutches. So we'll talk about what that looks like a little later. But first off, I wanna pose a question to you. And that is, does heat stress actually impact calves in Wisconsin? And this is kind of a hot button issue as we think of Wisconsin as being more of a cold climate kind of situation, but we all know that it does in fact get hot as it is today. But that is an interesting part with calves is that the THI, which is the temperature humidity index, at which calves start to kind of feel the impacts of heat stress is 69. So that's kind of our magic number here. And that's that line across this graph. So I have graphed from the data that I will show you, the average THI throughout the day at different hours. And we can see in this graph that the THI is higher than that 69, 14 hours of the day. And there is a lot of data that even as low as 4-6 hours is enough for calves to feel this heat. So one thing that I really would hope that you guys take away from this talk is that yes, heat stress does impact calves in Wisconsin. So one of the things that we talk about with calves is that there just is not enough heat stress abatement open to them. And why is that? And that would be for a couple of reasons. Firstly, cows exhibit milk losses, and these are kind of what we call the tangible effects, a little bit of what Barbara talked about and things like that, rumination times. So calves don't have these things. We're not monitoring those for those calves. Another perception that is partially true, but I would like to add some more context, is that calves thermoregulate better due to their larger surface area to body weight ratio. While they do have this ratio, their thermoregulatory systems are not fully developed and they're just not enough to overcome this heat stress. So the other piece that I think is particularly important is that there is such a broad range of housing types in the Midwest, but we commonly use outdoor individual hutches, which then there's an issue with infrastructure. But also, these hutches are mainly for winter, which then, if you've been in a hutch ever, you know in the summer, those are hot. So we need to find a way to kind of alleviate that. So that's when our lab came up with the idea to use a mechanical ventilation system. So this JDS communications paper was the first prototype. So if you're interested in hearing the before to me, go check that out. But that was in 2021. And it provided some important context for improvements, as well as some findings that helped us kind of decide where we wanted to go in this next iteration. So here is a little bit of just an overview of what this system looks like. So we did this in summer 2022, so keep that in mind. You know, heat stress is just gonna keep being a problem, and this is already 3 years ago. So we have a solar panel, which is going to provide power to this fan that is, you know, goes through the control panel, which powers the fan. We also had a silencer for that motor just to try to kind of minimize any noise that calf might face, because all of then that air goes in through that little, let me see if I can get this little hole in the back of the hutch. But one of the things that we adjusted was we added a bifurcated tube, which is right here. And you can see how one fan powers 2 hutches. So we're able to be a little bit more strategic, and we can use more than one, cool more than one hutch, with one fan. So one piece that we really needed to make sure was happening, and luckily we did find that it was increasing the airspeed. You want to make sure that those fans are working. So we were able to achieve a 1.1 meters per second airspeed in those fans, and then a 0.07 in like the natural or passive ventilation hutches. So those are definitely not getting a lot of airflow breeze at all. So just to give some context to the results that I'll be going through, this is a lot of information about what we did, but the main points are we had 2 treatments, this active ventilation with the fans, and then a natural or passive ventilation that was aimed for more of what you would see on a farm. So the back window opened just a little bit and the hutch rear windows open a little as well. And we really wanted to focus on growth. So we collected growth measures weekly, that's body weight, things like that. And then thermal regulation and microclimate, and that is what we spent a lot of time on. So for thermal regulation data, we collected that 3 times per week, as well as microclimate, and I'll get into a little bit of what that looked like here soon. But we also did some health scores and ultrasounds just to monitor, what they were looking like health-wise. Additionally, so those fans were only on from 3 days until they were 28 days old, so like about the first 4 weeks of life. And then afterwards, the fans were turned off, and that will become important to put some of the context in these results. So we will move on to the results. So firstly, what we did to gain the data for these graphs is different restrictions. So we wanted to make sure that we understood the impact of the fan when the calves were using it. In Wisconsin, in these pen systems, they have free access. So to make sure that we saw the effect of the fan, we did an outside hour-long restriction where they had no access to the inside fan. And then at that point, after an hour, collected respiration rate, rectal temperature, skin temperature, and sweating rate, and then put them inside of their hutches for another hour and waited and collected those same things. While they were outside, just a side note, we also collected their microclimate, which I'll show later, but that was just to make sure that the calves weren't in there to stir up the dust. So for respiration rate, we saw that obviously giving access to shade helped cool them off a lot, which at least there's something happening good with those hutches, even if they are a little toasty. But the fans were able to decrease respiration rate by 5 breaths per minute and a decrease in rectal temperature by an additional 0.1 degrees C, which can be pretty important when you're looking at calves with health issues. So additionally, we also saw differences in sweating rate and skin temperature. So sweating rate, they had a greater decrease by 2 units, and skin temperature, a greater decrease by 3 degrees. So that's really great for those actively cooled calves. So one thing, I'd mentioned that we wanted to look at growth, but we did not actually see any growth differences during the treatment period. And I think that this is pretty important because then after treatment, we did see some very slight differences in average daily gain after, and I'll discuss that a little further at the end. But we also noticed no differences in health, and that was with subclinical pneumonia, diarrhea, fever. None of those things were different between treatments. So there wasn't a direct adverse effect on health in this population. Another thing that we did is in collaboration with Dr. Van Os and Dr. Durea's lab, we looked at behavior. So we put up some cameras that took pictures of them every 15 minutes. And with deep learning and computer vision, we were able to decide, or the computer was able to decide what each calf was doing. So here I have an example of each of the 3 behaviors that we looked at. So this first one, she's outside of her hutch and she's lying down. The second one, she's inside. We can't really tell exactly what she's doing, so she's just inside. And then this third one, she is outside and she's standing up doing something. So the big takeaway with this behavior data is that active and this passively housed calves spent about the same time inside their hutches, but of the time that they both spent outside, the active calves spent more time outside lying than standing, and that's important for growth. It's a resting behavior. It's also, they're probably having better thermoregulatory response because they're not standing up and panting and things like that. So we were happy to see those results. And then finally, microclimate, we did a couple of things. Firstly, we quantified the colony forming units in the hutches, and that is shown here in some bacteria plates that were cultured. And we had a very significant decrease in the amount of bacteria that was present in those active hutches after 28 days of calf occupancy. So they've been in those hutches, they're doing all of the things that a calf does, and they're having less bacteria that could be harmful for them. We also noticed less formaldehyde buildup, so same situation after 28 days. We didn't have an overall difference, but if you look in the treatment by week, you see that the more that they're in the hutch, the less buildup you actually get. And the same with ammonia. So those are all really important to make sure that we're minimizing in these calf systems where they're very much inside and in the dirt and the air all the time. So the active ventilation system improved hutch microclimate, and I think that's really important. So just to kind of finish it all up, wrap it up, providing the active ventilation via solar-powered fans cooled calves more efficiently when they use them, our little caveat, did not impact growth or health during that 4-week ventilation treatment period, and the health continued on. And allowed for more resting time for the growing calves, as well as improved hutch microclimate. One little future direction and note is that we did see that slight reduction in average daily gain. They were still gaining, still growing, but we did see that their rates were a little bit lower in that active than that passive. So one of the things that we have thought of is that maybe this could indicate that the fans are a little bit more necessary throughout, almost kind of giving them an additional challenge. So that would be something that we would recommend in the future if someone were to adapt this system, which we think would be a good idea. You could also add additional shade over the hutch to provide a greater cooling effect, and that is just some based off of general, cooling principles. So with that, thank you to all of the Laporta lab members, our additional collaborators, and the animal care staff, as well as the Dairy Innovation Hub for helping to acquire the fans. And yeah, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Grace. Questions for Grace?
Hello, very good presentation. I have kind of two-part question. Do you think you'd see similar results in all different seasons? And is there a possibility, especially with Wisconsin with our winters, what kind of results do you think you would see there? And then do you think even you saw more bacteria in the calves that were only inside the hutches? Could they possibly have a stronger immunity because they're exposed to that versus the other calves?
So the first question, I think you'd have to be a little bit careful because in a cooling system, not a cooling system, but a ventilation system in a cow barn, is that kind of what you're thinking, equal maybe, for the winter time? But okay, I'm not totally. Yeah, so that was only for an hour. Otherwise, they had free access. So I think in the winter, then I wouldn't probably keep the fan going. So I'm not sure if this system is worth it for the winter. It would be way too much air. I think kind of what I was getting at with a tube system, they're far away, you're not pushing a lot of air through, but in this one, it is a 1 meter per second blast of air. So I don't think when you're trying to bed calves up really high in the winter, that would be the best idea. And then for the second part about kind of the immunity, we did have like a sister publication, sister study that looked at things like neutrophil function. So the calves who had fans had better neutrophil function, and they just generally were better off in those through like, oh my gosh, I'm losing it. Yeah, better neutrophil function and better general immune function. So that is not shown here, but we do have additional information if you would like that.
Question here.
Do you think that the bedding also affects something with the ventilations and all the microbes that are growing over there?
100%. They were all bedded with sand. So I think if you use straw, if you were to use sawdust, any of the other things, you would have to double check and really run this fan system again, just to make sure that those are the same results. But in sand, these were our results. But yeah, that's a great point.
One more. There's one more there.
I was kind of wondering, you said that there's no health impact on the cows, on the calves, and does that like also translate to like later in life? Does like heat stress impact cows like later in life, that like calves that were impacted by heat stress? Because I'm just thinking like, is this like a worth it investment if it's only for 3 months of the time?
Yes. So I have not specifically looked at this group of calves for their longer term health yet, but our lab has definitely found that there are long-term effects. We've focused on, even at that pre-weaning heat stress, they do go on to produce less milk in their first lactation. And then even more things like dry cows, if you have them, those calves are already impacted. So you want to make sure that you're kind of fixing any of those issues. And it's not just health that's impacted by heat stress, it's everything. It's their mammary glands, it's just how their skin reacts, all of these different things. So even if you're not seeing these tangible effects, you still want to continue to make sure that you're providing heat abatement.
All right, let's give Grace another big hand.
Thank you.